On just his 227th day in office, Joe Biden may be in more trouble than any president has ever been in. For Rasmussen is out with a poll today in which a majority of Americans, an astounding 52% of those surveyed, believe President Biden ought to resign from office. And just as astoundingly, only 39% of respondents say they want him to remain. That is 13 points underwater, and he is only 62% of the way through the first year of his first term. There is only one instance in our history since the advent of modern polling that even comes close to qualifying as a precedent for numbers like these, and that was Richard Nixon in late July and early August of 1974, when 51% said he should resign or be removed. But even at the height of his infamy, even after 18 months of the slow drip of the Watergate scandal, Nixon still had a solid 45% of the public that wanted him to stay. So to put it another way, Joe Biden right now is more than twice as far underwater on this particular poll question than Richard Nixon was in the week before he resigned the presidency. And yes, I know we don't ever talk very much about polling numbers around here because they tend to not be very instructive. And throughout the first 2 decades of this century and into the third, pollsters have increasingly become an industry that seeks to shape public opinion rather than to reflect it. But among the major polling firms, Rasmussen is the one that retains the most credibility, and by a rather wide margin. They were the only ones who were remotely close to calling the 2016 election correctly. Their methods are much more scientifically sound. The questions they ask are not as loaded with weasel words and sneaky appeals to emotion like so many of the others. So when the members of the Biden team saw these Rasmussen numbers, which probably happened yesterday since they were publicly released today, with a majority wanting him to resign and less than 40% wanting him to remain in office, I guarantee you Joe wasn't the only one shitting the bed for a change. And in theory, that could go a long way toward explaining the bizarre display that we witnessed yesterday, where the president showed up 45 minutes late for his address to the nation that had been scheduled for 3 o'clock Eastern time, because dude thinks he's Axl Rose now, apparently. And instead of getting the mumbling, woozy, disoriented, half-asleep version of Joe Biden to which we're accustomed, we got angry, cranky, yelling, screaming Joe, who waved his bony old finger right in our faces and read us the riot act for having the temerity, the unmitigated gall, to screw up his victory lap and deny him what was supposed to be his crowning signature achievement. I don't know what they did to get him whipped up into such a lather, whether they shot him full of amphetamines or pumped him full of coffee or threatened to send him to bed with no applesauce, but who the hell knows? Whatever it was, regrettably, it didn't cause him to speak any less incoherently in the delivery of his own native language. He was still, in true late-period Joe Biden style, sort of wildly careening between vaguely intelligible words with a bunch of random verbal noises in between. And it's interesting, I think, how it's the bigger words that he enunciates the most clearly. While it's the simplest parts of speech, the articles and adverbs and such that turn into sort of a cacophony of Z's and H's. But he sure was louder than usual, and boy was he fighting mad. I was half expecting that he was going to threaten to drag us all behind the gym and give us a good thrashing, maybe wrap a motorcycle chain around our collective heads like he did to good old Corn Pop, or at least challenge us to a push-up contest at any rate. But make no mistake, Mr. and Mrs. America, President Angry Cranky Joe has heard just about enough lip out of you dog-faced pony soldiers, because damn it, he'll have you know that our exit from Afghanistan was one of the greatest achievements in world history. Like the Dunkirk evacuation and the Berlin airlift had a bastard love child and they named it Operation Baby Lift. We got 90% of the Americans out who wanted to get out, scolded President Angry Joe. And nobody ever thought that was possible. And of course, he apparently was forgetting all about 2.5 weeks ago when he was still confidently asserting that we would get out every single U.S. citizen, no qualifiers, no caveats, in addition to every Afghan who ever appeared on one of our payrolls, and if he didn't, then by God, our people would remain behind until the job was done. Because this cranky old codger thinks your memory and attention span are even shorter than his own. You weren't supposed to remember that stuff I said back in mid-August. What the hell is the point of moving the goalposts every day if you assholes out in flyover country are just going to hold me to the promises I made 16 days ago? But the part of this address that I found the most mind-boggling was when he said, just matter-of-factly, like it was a trivial, trifling detail, that he decided in April that he was going to pull all of our people out of Afghanistan? Wait, come again? There was a May 1st deadline in place, and you didn't decide until freaking April that you were going to tear up the deal that Trump and his people had negotiated? May I ask just exactly what the hell you were doing for the other 90 days, sir? Because I'm no arithmetical genius, I just do math for a living, but it seems like there's a similar amount of time between April and August as there is between January and May. So it would seem to follow that if you'd started planning the withdrawal on 20 January when you assumed office, you would have had just as much time to plan the thing, and we could have been out by the May 1st deadline without making liars of ourselves and needlessly antagonizing the Taliban. Sorry, the Taliban. Hey, Mr. Taliban, help me with my burqa. And we could have been making our exit in the spring when all the seasonal Afghan fighters were off at home harvesting their opium crops and fornicating with their goats rather than during the summer, which is the peak of their fighting season. Oh, but then Donald Trump might have been able to claim some credit for an orderly exfiltration. And we can't have that, can we? But you know what? I'm guessing the parents and the spouses and the children of those 13 dead Americans and the 29 Sacramento school children you left behind probably wouldn't have minded that scenario very much. I guess their opinions don't count though, do they? Hit the music, Jim Eagle. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we don't hand weapons to our mortal enemies or fornicate with goats, despite any scurrilous rumors you may have heard. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I don't use social media, as most of you here probably know by now, but it's my understanding that on Twitter and Facebook and so on in the past day or two, there's been a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of mea culpas from people who say they now regret having voted for the corpse of Joe Biden last November because, golly gee whiz, they had no idea that a Biden presidency might devolve so quickly into a shit show of such epoch-shattering proportions. And if there are any such people within the sound of my voice right now, bring it in, because you and I need to have a word. You ready? What in the actual fuck is wrong with you? If you'll permit me to ask, what exactly did you think you were going to get with a Joe Biden presidency? And if you say the word empathy, I swear to God I'm going to reach through the screen and slap the shit out of you. Did you think you were voting for some sort of return to normalcy? Did you think Joe Biden was going to be a kindly grandfather to the nation, a steady hand on the tiller, a human wellspring of dignity and wisdom and experience who would banish the specter of the bad orange man and his mean tweets? Or did you even put that much thought into it? Did you vote according to what some guy on the television said, or some guy on the radio, or some guy on the internet? Because here's the thing, and I want you youngsters to pay particular attention to this part. The people who've been trying to explain away their indefensible error in judgment by saying, well, yeah, I knew he used to be a senator and a vice president and whatever, but I was just a kid, so I don't remember any of that. Hey, dickheads, I got a news flash for you. You walk around every day with the entire collected repository of human knowledge and understanding on a little glowing rectangle that you keep in your back pocket. So when you throw up your hands and claim ignorance of everything that happened in the world prior to your own birth, people like me, people who are old enough to remember coming of age in a world where a thing like the internet seemed like futuristic magic, it makes us want to wring your neck for being such a ridiculous, dumbass rube. The man you voted for has a 50-year track record in national public office. So you couldn't stop looking at porn and playing video games long enough to acquaint yourself with the career of the man you were ready to install as the goddamn leader of the free world? That little glowing rectangle in your back pocket, contains more knowledge than Aristotle or Sir Isaac Newton or Thomas Edison or Albert Einstein ever dreamed of having access to, and you use it to watch porn and play video games, and you can't even make the time to turn yourself into a well-informed voter. So how does that make you feel? Because it should make you feel deeply ashamed of yourself. And yeah, Donald Trump is a brash, obnoxious man who has no shortage of character flaws. But you know what else he is? He's a president who delivered peace, prosperity, and security. When you have a president like that, you don't fuck with the formula. You return him to office for another 4 years, because presidents who succeed in delivering peace, prosperity, and security don't come around very often. When they do, if you find them personally unlikable, if you find their social media posts distasteful, you bloody well get over it and vote for him anyway, because elections have consequences. And when you get an election wrong, the consequences can be really incredibly disastrous. People die. Empires crumble. Get enough elections wrong, and you may find yourself living in a world where your biggest concerns are the procurement of food, water, and shelter, rather than deciding which $1,000 smartphone to buy to watch porn and play video games on. If you had spent 30 minutes, maybe an hour tops, delving into the track record of Senator and Vice President Joe Biden, would you have still voted for him? If you had bothered paying close attention to last year's campaign, would you have still voted for him? Because I'm guessing the answer to both those questions is an emphatic no. Especially not if you voted for this guy, of all people, in the belief that he's some sort of racial progressive. Because you could have well discovered, and it wouldn't even have taken 30 minutes, that this guy began his career in national politics as an openly segregationist senator. An unreconstructed Southern Democrat who didn't want his state's public schools getting turned into a racial jungle by those damn Yankee Republicans. Moreover, you may have discovered that Joe Biden is probably the most notoriously racist senator of the last 50 years, who makes more racially offensive remarks in an average 12-month period than Donald Trump ever has or ever will. You could multiply Donald Trump's lifetime by a factor of 20, and he still wouldn't be in the same neighborhood. But you may well have voted for Biden in the belief that Trump is a racist. And why? Because a man on television said so? How long are you going to let a man on television make your moral judgments for you, rather than using the awesome power of the magic glowing rectangle in your pocket to find out what things really are? Joe Biden has never had any discernible skills or talents of which to speak. He managed to carve out a career for himself in national politics because all he had to do was convince fewer than 150,000 Delawareans to return him to the Senate every 6 years. He once had a lifeguard job at the Wilmington YMCA, and that is the extent of his experience in the private sector. He had never worked in the entirety of his nearly 8 decades on this planet in any sort of executive or managerial capacity until the day he was installed as President of the United States. And all it would have taken was maybe a 20-minute break from porn and video games to ascertain these things for yourself and to vote accordingly. But if that's too much effort to ask, if being a willfully ignorant voter is how you plan on playing things for the remainder of your life, then I would politely ask that you please never, ever, ever vote again. Because personally, I would much prefer to die in a country that I actually recognize as the country of my birth. But if the electorate is made up primarily of people like you, empty-headed simpletons who can be swayed by yard signs and bumper stickers and the most frivolous appeals to emotion and tribalism, then I will not be afforded that opportunity. There's also been a lot of talk these past few days about the president needing to be impeached, and I need to devote the remainder of the episode to registering my strenuous opposition to that idea. Impeachment is supposed to be an absolute last resort, which is reserved only for willful acts of corruption or criminal malfeasance. You don't impeach a president just because he's really bad at his job. If we allow the standard that Pelosi and the Democrats set while they were in the farthest gone throes of Trump's psychosis complex to become the new normal, then impeachment is rendered utterly meaningless. And then what the hell are we supposed to do when we have a president who's an actual criminal? Impeachment then becomes just another event on the political calendar. Something the opposition party does each time the president makes a policy decision that they don't like. When Bill Clinton was impeached, it was not over a blowjob, irrespective of anything you may have heard from any Clinton or Democrat apologist. It was because he perjured himself under oath as the sitting president. He committed a felonious act, willfully, consciously, on purpose, under oath, while in office, which equals an intentional act of criminal malfeasance, which makes it subject to the remedy of impeachment. All he had to do was tell the truth. Yeah, that fat intern sucked me off, and I used her cooter for a humidor. Then there's nothing to impeach him for. Then he's just a sleazy old bastard who cheats on his wife and preys on female subordinates in the workplace. But he's not a felon. He chose to make himself a felon, and impeaching him absolutely was the right thing to do, irrespective of whether there was ever a chance of his being removed from office. Now, Joe Biden is an historically bad president, quite possibly the worst one in the history of the Republic. Even I, loquacious and verbose as I pride myself on being, sometimes struggle to find adjectives that do justice to how incompetent this man is in the discharge of the duties of his office. But do I think he's being a bad president on purpose? No, I don't. He's just a clueless, senile buffoon who can't tell his ass from a hole in the ground, who was installed in the presidency because a bunch of low-information voters got conned into voting for his decrepit old ass. But none of that constitutes grounds for impeachment. But the 25th Amendment? That's a different matter entirely. Because I think there absolutely is a credible case to be made that Joe Biden suffers from a mental incapacity that renders him incapable of effectively discharging his duties. I'm not a medical doctor, and even if I was, I haven't examined the guy. But there exists a wealth of empirical evidence that he is suffering from either dementia or Alzheimer's disease. I think it was an act of profound cruelty that his family members or his political associates or some combination of the two encouraged him to run for president when they knew perfectly well, because it's evident to anyone who's paying attention, that he was not capable of standing up to the rigors of the most difficult, most grueling job that exists on this earth. And yes, I know what the counter-argument is, but then we'll have President Kamala Harris, and that could be even worse. Yes, we will, and yes, it could. But you know what I say to that? Bring on President Harris. Let the voters see exactly what the hell they voted for. Let them see the worst case scenario of lazy, ignorant voting, and maybe they'll vote more carefully in the future, or ideally, they won't vote at all. Let them see that if you're stupid enough to cast your vote on the basis of, ooh, she's a woman of color, it's so historic, then the chance exists that you might wind up stuck with a president who has never displayed any discernible skills, who got her start in politics by being Willie Brown's side piece, who has been allowed to fail upward and upward and upward because she happens to have a vagina and a non-white ethnic heritage. Let them reap the whirlwind of affirmative action run amok, and we'll see how they like the results. But having said all that, I think there is one penalty, one means of recourse that is valid and applicable, and which President Joe Biden probably should be subjected to. For he is the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Armed Forces, and through some unfortunate combination of his blundering incompetence, cognitive decline, and personal hubris, he has directly given aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States by the decision to abandon Bagram Air Base and make a gift of $85 billion worth of vehicles, weapons, and equipment to the Taliban and ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Russia, China. Each one of our enemies is going to reap a dividend from that decision, which, even if it was inadvertent, rises to the level of a traitorous act. If a general had done the same thing, you bet your sweet ass that guy would get court-martialed. And it should be no different for the Commander-in-Chief, who is also, under the auspices of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, an active duty member of the armed forces, and who is thus subject to all the penalties that code prescribes for the dereliction of one's duty. Even Joe Biden's staunchest defenders, at least the ones who still remain, I haven't heard a single one of them attempt to defend the decision to abandon Bagram in the middle of the night while taking none of our gear with us. The Taliban are now a modern technological fighting force. They are now the most powerful army in Central Asia. These 8th century barbarian, savage, cave-dwelling goat fornicators, because Joe Biden chose to make them that. And now Joe Biden's retarded Secretary of State, the erstwhile 90s alternative rock star, quivering Tony Blinken, he won't rule out giving direct financial assistance to the freaking Taliban, as if the $85 billion gift of weapons and vehicles and equipment and ammunition, the biggest gift of military aid ever bestowed by one country on another, was somehow so insufficient that we need to deliver them a bunch of pallets of cash on top of it. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, it matters not whether aid and comfort to the enemy was given wittingly or unwittingly. So let's stop talking impeachment and start talking court-martial. Because if we care about the rule of law, that is the appropriate remedy for the actions of our president. Thank you for watching. See you Friday. Get off my lawn.